On the 6th of June, 1944, the beaches of Normandy became the blood-soaked stage for the largest amphibious assault in history. The Allied forces had poured onto the sands under relentless German fire, and by the following weeks, they were locked in a grueling struggle to break through the hedgerows, those ancient earthen barriers that seemed designed by nature to stall armies. Every field in Normandy was a fortress. Every hedge became a death trap. American soldiers fought inch by inch, often in brutal close combat, with casualties mounting at an alarming rate. For weeks, the front moved at a crawl. The men of the First Army, under Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, clawed forward through narrow lanes, stone walls, and dense vegetation, the oppressive green masking deadly German defenses. The advance toward Paris seemed almost impossible, with every yard gained costing human lives measured in dozens, then hundreds. By the 25th of July, after 6 weeks of relentless fighting, Operation Cobra shattered the German defensive lines at St. Lo. The long-awaited breakthrough finally came, and the Americans pushed forward with unprecedented speed. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley's First Army had created a gap, and General George S. Patton's Third Army, operational since the 1st of August, immediately seized the opportunity. Patton, always impatient and audacious, exploited the opening with the kind of speed that left his superiors both awed and anxious. His tanks moved with such rapidity that forward air controllers could scarcely keep up with the shifting front line. Maps became guides, not orders. Tank commanders relied on instinct and intuition, driving toward objectives that were often miles ahead of officially designated positions. Units advanced 30 miles per day through gaps the Germans could not close, and by mid-August, German commanders admitted they had no way to halt the American advance. The question was no longer whether the Allies would reach Germany. It was when. Patton's rapid advance, however, came at a cost. The Third Army consumed 400,000 gallons of fuel per day, a staggering logistical requirement that stretched supply lines back to the beaches of Normandy, some 400 miles away. The Red Ball Express ran continuously, trucks crisscrossing the country day and night, drivers pushing themselves past exhaustion to keep pace with the armored columns. Even with maximum effort, supplies often arrived too late. By the 20th of August, Third Army was facing dwindling fuel reserves. Tanks, the lifeblood of Patton's advance, were at risk of running dry. But Patton, ever the risk-taker, ordered his commanders to continue moving, to maintain momentum at all costs, believing that hesitation could be more dangerous than overreach. His gamble paid off. German resistance in France was crumbling. Paris lay within reach, and beyond it stretched open country all the way to the German frontier. Meanwhile, German forces in France were in chaos. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge reported to Hitler that the Wehrmacht in Western Europe was effectively destroyed. Units abandoned equipment, vehicles, and supplies in their frantic retreat east toward the Rhine River. One tank commander in the 4th Armored Division wrote home that he could smell the panic on the fleeing Germans, their terror almost tangible. His men, fueled by adrenaline and caffeine, believed they would be in Berlin by Christmas. Fatigue did not matter. Only the thrill of victory and the pursuit of a collapsing enemy occupied their minds. Yet this headlong rush across France, seemingly unstoppable, was about to encounter an obstacle far more complex than the Wehrmacht itself. It was not German resistance that would slow the Americans, nor supply shortages that could halt their advance, but a political calculation made thousands of miles away. Charles de Gaulle, leader of the Free French forces and the embodiment of French political aspirations, was poised to intervene. De Gaulle had waited 4 long years for this moment. Paris, the symbol of France, was on the brink of liberation, and the eyes of the world would soon focus on the city. For de Gaulle, it was imperative that French forces enter the capital first, to ensure that the narrative of liberation would belong to the French rather than their American allies. His determination was absolute, and the consequences of his intervention would ripple across the remainder of the campaign. While de Gaulle maneuvered politically, German Field Marshal Walter Model was performing a feat of organizational brilliance that few recognized at the time. Hitler had sent him west on the 17th of August with orders to salvage what remained of the German army. Model arrived to find chaos. German units were scattered, command structures had collapsed, and morale was dangerously low. Yet, he noticed a glimmer of hope. The American advance had slowed, not because German forces were resisting, but because the Americans themselves were pausing. Units approaching Paris were waiting, idle for reasons that Model could not immediately comprehend. Seizing the opportunity, he ordered all surviving German units to withdraw toward Germany, establish defensive positions along the Moselle River, and fortify stripped-down sections of the Siegfried Line. Units that had been fleeing in panic just a week earlier now had the time to reorganize, resupply, and prepare defensive positions that would prove deadly to the Americans in the months ahead. Model's chief logistics officer later testified that the week between the 20th and 27th of August saved the German army from total destruction. On the 21st of August, de Gaulle met with Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower. His demand was straightforward. French forces must liberate Paris. Eisenhower explained the situation. Patton's Third Army was perfectly positioned to cut off German escape routes and could secure Paris within days. From a purely military perspective, there was no reason to delay. De Gaulle, however, cared little for such considerations. Political symbolism outweighed strategic efficiency. The French people, he argued, needed to witness French soldiers reclaiming their capital, and he was prepared to act unilaterally if necessary, potentially fracturing the Allied chain of command. Eisenhower, faced with a delicate balance between battlefield logic and political necessity, chose the latter. Maintaining coalition unity, ensuring France's post-liberation governance, and keeping de Gaulle satisfied took precedence over immediate military advantage. The order reached Patton. Third Army would halt. Supplies, fuel, and ammunition would be diverted to support the French 2nd Armored Division. Tanks that had been racing toward Germany would now sit idle. Patton's fury was legendary, but even he could not overturn the command decision. On the 25th of August, French forces entered Paris. Crowds lined the streets, church bells rang, and de Gaulle stood in Notre Dame Cathedral to declare France liberated. Politically, the victory was total. Militarily, it came at a staggering cost. Fuel that could have powered Third Army to the German border was instead consumed in Paris. Thousands of tons of supplies were redirected to the city to sustain the French forces and the liberated population. Trucks that might have delivered ammunition to the front were filled with gasoline, food, coal, and medicine for a parade. Soldiers at the front, who had fought across France, could only watch in bitter frustration as the resources necessary to finish the war were rerouted. Patton's supply officers calculated the cost. Supporting Paris consumed enough fuel to move Third Army 100 miles closer to Germany, a distance that could have put American forces across the Moselle River before German defenses were fortified. Political symbolism had trumped military efficiency, and Germany was watching every move. When Patton's tanks resumed their advance on the 28th of August, the difference was stark. What had been a disordered, retreating enemy now stood firm in fortified positions. The Moselle River, which could have been crossed easily a week prior, was bristling with artillery and entrenched defenders. Intelligence officers reported that units that had been in full retreat were now manning fortified positions along the Siegfried Line. The week lost to political maneuvering had allowed Germany to transform chaos into an organized defense. By early September, Third Army faced severe fuel shortages. The Red Ball Express could not keep up with demand, and tanks were running dry just as they approached the German frontier. Orders soon arrived to halt operations indefinitely. Fuel priority had shifted to Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery's campaigns in Belgium. Patton's opportunity to strike deep into Germany in August was gone. The consequences of the pause reverberated immediately. German divisions used the extra week to reinforce the Siegfried Line with fresh troops. What should have been a rapid conquest became a grinding battle through fortified positions. American forces soon collided with concrete pillboxes, machine gun nests, and meticulously prepared artillery emplacements. Every advance cost hundreds of lives. Soldiers who had raced across France now fought for every 100 yards of ground. The war that might have ended in 1944 was stretched into 1945. The weather, which had aided the August advance, turned harsh. Bright summer days gave way to rain and mud, and soon the freezing snows of the Ardennes arrived. Soldiers who should have been home were now huddled in foxholes, shivering, and waiting for an enemy that had been beaten months prior. The pause at Paris ensured that the campaign's momentum was lost, and the consequences would be felt in the coming winter. By the 16th of December, Germany launched the Battle of the Bulge, using divisions reorganized by Model during that critical week in August. The offensive bought Hitler the winter he desperately needed. American casualties exceeded 80,000. De Gaulle's political triumph in Paris came at a tragic human cost. Eisenhower preserved coalition unity, but thousands of Americans paid the price in frost and blood. By early September, the consequences of the pause at Paris became painfully clear. Patton's Third Army, once racing across France with unstoppable momentum, now crawled through increasingly fortified terrain. What had been open countryside became a labyrinth of pillboxes, anti-tank obstacles, and entrenched German positions along the Siegfried Line. Every mile gained demanded relentless effort, courage, and ingenuity. Soldiers who had once sprinted through abandoned villages and deserted roads now found themselves bogged down in mud, facing machine gun fire from every angle. The terrain was unrelenting, but so too were the defenders, reorganized and emboldened by the extra week they had gained during the Paris pause. The Red Ball Express, the lifeline of Patton's advance, strained under the weight of necessity. Fuel, ammunition, and food had to cover hundreds of miles, stretching already exhausted drivers to their limits. Convoys moved day and night, headlights cutting through rain and fog, engines straining under the heavy loads. Soldiers at the front watched helplessly as supply trucks diverted to support other operations, knowing that every delayed gallon of fuel meant their tanks could stall in the mud, or their artillery could fall silent at the moment of attack. The disparity between ambition and resources became painfully evident. For Patton, who believed in speed and momentum above all, this logistical bottleneck was infuriating. German commanders, now fully recovered from their initial retreat, exploited every advantage. Model, von Rundstedt, and their subordinates had transformed the chaos of August into a formidable defense. Fresh divisions brought from Germany filled gaps, while engineers reinforced roads, bridges, and defensive emplacements. Anti-tank obstacles lined narrow approaches, and artillery positions were carefully coordinated to maximize their effect on advancing American forces. Units that had once fled in disorder now engaged with precision and discipline. The chaotic retreat of early August had given way to a lethal, organized resistance. American soldiers, exhausted from weeks of rapid advance, and forced to endure delays, felt the frustration keenly. Men who had expected to reach Berlin by Christmas found themselves huddled in foxholes, knee-deep in mud, and facing relentless German fire. Letters home spoke of hunger, cold, and fear, but also determination and camaraderie. Soldiers wrote of friends lost in sudden ambushes, of tanks immobilized by artillery fire, and of the bitter irony of fighting so far from home when victory had seemed just weeks away. The human cost of the political pause in Paris was becoming increasingly apparent. Despite these challenges, Patton refused to surrender initiative. He reorganized units, improvised supply solutions, and pushed forward with the audacity that had defined his career. Reconnaissance units probed German defenses, finding weak points, while artillery and air support hammered enemy positions. Yet each advance was measured in yards rather than miles. The pace that had once seemed unstoppable now became a grinding struggle. Casualties mounted, and medical units struggled to keep up with the wounded. Supply lines were stretched to their absolute limits, and the winter rains made transport and movement even more difficult. German forces, aware of their newfound advantage, took the initiative where possible. Counterattacks, though limited in scale, inflicted maximum disruption on American operations. Sniper fire, minefields, and carefully timed artillery barrages slowed Patton's advance and inflicted casualties. Model's meticulous planning ensured that every opportunity was exploited. The delay that had seemed so frustrating to the Americans in August now allowed Germany to prepare for winter, reinforcing defenses and delaying the inevitable. By the end of September, Third Army faced another critical challenge: fuel shortages. The Red Ball Express could no longer meet the voracious demands of mechanized warfare at the front. Tanks stalled on narrow roads, artillery units waited for resupply, and infantry endured long periods without essential support. The pause at Paris, intended for political advantage, had created a ripple effect that limited operational efficiency and forced Patton to confront the reality of logistics as an equal partner in warfare. Every decision, every diversion of fuel and supplies had real consequences on the battlefield. As October arrived, the weather worsened, with persistent rain turning roads to mud and complicating every movement. Soldiers and tank crews worked tirelessly to maintain equipment, clear obstacles, and sustain morale. The contrast between the open-speed advances of August and the slow, grueling operations of autumn could not have been starker. Patton's frustration was compounded by the knowledge that the Germans, rejuvenated and fortified, were now a much more formidable adversary than in August. The opportunity to crush the enemy before winter had slipped away, replaced by a protracted, deadly slog through fortified positions that would cost thousands of American lives. Yet, despite exhaustion and frustration, Patton's army adapted. Engineers built makeshift bridges, supply units innovated with convoy scheduling, and infantry units adjusted tactics to exploit terrain and enemy weaknesses. The fighting became more deliberate, more calculated, but the stakes remained the same. The drive toward Germany had to continue. Every gain was hard-won, every mile a testament to courage, discipline, and the relentless will of soldiers who understood that the path to victory now demanded both patience and ferocity. By the end of October, it was clear that the war that might have been over in late 1944 had now become a winter campaign. The pause at Paris, while politically advantageous, had fundamentally changed the strategic landscape. German forces had time to reorganize, fortify, and prepare, ensuring that the Americans would now face a much more challenging adversary. The stage was set for the battles that would define the remainder of 1944 and carry the war into the new year, with the consequences of political decisions echoing across every battlefield, every supply line, and every foxhole. As November of 1944 approached, the American advance had slowed to a painful crawl. Patton's tanks, once a symbol of unstoppable momentum, now moved cautiously through fortified German positions. The effects of the August pause at Paris had rippled across the campaign. German forces, having reorganized and reinforced, were prepared for the winter. Engineers repaired roads, rebuilt bridges, and strengthened defensive lines along the Siegfried Line. Every mile of progress demanded more resources, more effort, and more lives. Soldiers who had raced across France in August were now huddled in foxholes, enduring the rain and mud, facing a tenacious enemy that had been given the precious gift of time. By mid-December, Germany launched its desperate gamble, the Ardennes Offensive, later known as the Battle of the Bulge. The divisions that Model had reorganized during that critical week in August now struck with precision and force. The pause in Paris had allowed Germany to preserve its best units, to stockpile supplies, and to prepare a winter counter-offensive. American forces, exhausted from weeks of slow, grueling fighting, were caught off guard by the ferocity of the attack. Casualties mounted quickly, exceeding 80,000, as soldiers struggled through snow, ice, and freezing temperatures. The war that could have ended in late 1944 had been prolonged, all because the political symbolism of liberating Paris had temporarily outweighed battlefield efficiency. Meanwhile, Charles de Gaulle basked in the glory of his political triumph. Images of the liberated Paris, crowds cheering and church bells ringing, became iconic symbols of French resurgence. Eisenhower preserved coalition unity, ensuring that France remained firmly aligned with the Allies. But the cost was measured in the lives and suffering of American soldiers. Patton, frustrated beyond measure, understood that the opportunity to strike a decisive blow in August had been squandered. The tanks that could have crossed the Moselle River and broken into Germany sat idle, and the momentum that had carried the Allies across France had been irretrievably lost. The winter of 1944 turned into a brutal test of endurance, courage, and strategy. American soldiers fought for every 100 yards of ground, facing well-prepared German defenses that might have been destroyed weeks earlier. The war, which had seemed nearly over during the blazing August advance, dragged on into 1945. The consequences of the Paris delay were clear. Germany had been given time to regroup, fortify, and strike back. Patton's Third Army endured frost, exhaustion, and endless struggle. But ultimately, the lessons of momentum, logistics, and the intersection of politics and warfare would be etched into the annals of military history. In the end, the liberation of Paris remained a powerful political and symbolic victory. The city's freedom was undeniable, and the images broadcast worldwide shaped the post-war narrative of France. Yet behind the celebrations lay the stark reality. Thousands of American soldiers had paid a high price for a decision that had been made in the corridors of political power. The race to Germany had been delayed. The Wehrmacht had been given a second chance. And the consequences were felt in the bitter snow and blood of the Ardennes. History would remember the triumph of Paris, but the silent cost of that decision would echo in every foxhole, every battlefield, and every life touched by the long winter campaign that followed.